And it's interesting because like you mentioned being overwhelmed, and 1,000,000%, it's so easy to be overwhelmed by this stuff. But I want to touch on that and say that what's helped me with being overwhelmed by this stuff is the moment that I dropped the expectation of having to perform, you know, in this like perfect sort of unrealistic way in everything that I'm doing. As soon as I alleviated myself of that pressure and gave myself permission to not be so perfect, is when I was really able to kind of like handle all of these different components that I'm kind of seemingly juggling at the same time. But when you approach it in that way, and you add this, and I'm sure you could relate to this, but when you add this component of joy to everything that you're doing, then like it none of this stuff feels like actual work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what allows for us to perform at the highest level. Like this interview that we're doing, I know it's going to be like super valuable for people, and it's like super dope to know that it is. But like this is me and you are just having a conversation. Like this is a fun conversation. Like there's nothing about this that like feels like work. You
Right.
know, but technically we are working. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So that's the beauty of this shit.
I love it. I love it. It's that joy. And the other thing that really helps for me as far as taking some of that pressure off is having that kind of mindset of everything's an experiment. You know, like, oh, I'm
Yes.
doing this big launch and it feels like if this thing goes well, it could be the thing that changes my life. And if it goes poorly, it feels like it's going to be the end of my world. Whether if either of those are true or not, sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes if I can shift my mindset to, you know what, it's an experiment. I'm going to put this thing out there. I'm going to try to do a podcast. I'm going to try to launch this thing. I'm going to try to make this beat, whatever it is. And I'm going to experiment and I'm going to learn. Either it's going to suck or it's going to be great or it's not. But either way, I'm just going to learn and do the next. That's been huge for me as far as that mindset shift. Cause I'm somebody who I get anxious. I psych myself out all the time. I feel overwhelmed, but that's been a big little hack there of just like, you know what, it's an experiment. We'll see. We'll have fun. We'll just see what happens. And if it tanks, cool. Well, then I learned something.
Exactly. Can you imagine how boring the world would be, or our lives would be, if, and this is going to sound weird at first, but can you imagine how boring it would be if everything that we tried to do like worked in this exact way that we thought it would? Like you would get to the point where you would run out of things to like do because you're doing everything, and then you lose the appreciation of something really working and something not working. Right? I think that's
Dude,
so interesting, dude. Like,
that
we
is
need those failures, man. We need them.
that's such an interesting way to put it because
It's
it
like
just
how,
you
sorry to cut you off, but just to add
no,
to it,
yeah.
it's like how boring would it, I know this sounds like kind of like this might come off a little D-bag-ish, but like a Grammy wouldn't be as special if I just told myself, "Hey, like this song's gonna get a Grammy," and then it like 100% does. Now, like 2 years later, I have 100 Grammys. It's like then you get to that tipping point where it's like, well, what's special anymore?
Yeah.
Right? So
No, it's funny, like, I feel like that just you just changed something in my brain where it sounds so obvious, but it's the trying and failing, it's the difficulty of it that makes it fun, and so if you just take it to that extreme of, well, okay, what happened if you take that out? Like, if that's what, like, you think you want, but it's like, "No, wait a second, I don't actually want that." That's the struggle is the fun part, the struggle is what makes it worth it, so that's really cool how you put it that way. I never, like, quite put it that way of like, you know what? Actually, I'm really grateful for the struggle because that's what makes it all worth it in the end. That's really dope. I like that.
absolutely, man. I am a big, obviously all of us love Bruce Lee, but that one quote that he said many, many decades ago, where he said, move like water, right? He's referencing water to everything that he did in his life. And that's sort of his like mantra. And when I think about waves and I think about water and I think about, all these people that say we'll keep it in the music producer world where, placements come in waves, or money that comes in waves, right? Which is 100% true. And I'm thinking about it and I'm like, okay, well, that's very similar to what we just talked about, which is some things we do work and some things we do won't work, right? Which is a wave, some shit's up, some shit is down. And I and then I started to dig a little deeper and I'm like, well, that's how music is. Music wouldn't be music if it wasn't for um, the the variation in sound and also the space between the notes, right? So then I'm thinking, okay, well, Quincy Jones said that silence is music, right? Which I think he got that from Claude Debussy, I think, this composer centuries ago. But then I'm like, okay, well, that's how life is, right? Like our failures are the equivalent to the spaces between the notes. And so without those spaces between those notes, there is no music. So you need those spaces. You need those time periods where stuff doesn't work, or maybe you go 6 months, a year, 2 years with no placements, and you're kind of like on this low part of the wave. But you need that in order to go this way and to get that dub. Otherwise, if you're up here, then there is no life really, right, without the downs as well. So when I started to really approach my philosophy and just everything that I do in that way, where I give myself permission, like you said, you know, this thing that I tried that didn't work, that's that's my space between the next, note that I'm about to play. And
Yeah.
and when I look at it that way, I feel a lot better about it.
Right. No, I
Yeah.
love it. I mean, that the snare hitting feels so good because of the tension that that kick created in time before it, right? It's
Tension,
like,
that's the word, dude. Yeah.
yeah,
Can
tension
you
and
imagine
relief.
us? Can you imagine us like a fire snare, just like selecting the snare and then just like repeating it with no spaces? Like, yeah, dude, your brain would explode.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. So